Hello everyone, welcome to the Net Online. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're going to kick things off as we always do with a short video clip that will correspond with our message today. Be sure to like and subscribe so we can give you future alerts for when we post messages, and drop a comment below, and thank you guys so much for joining us.
Anyway, that's how we're going to start off tonight, with a very inspiring video clip. I have several more video clips tonight. So let's go ahead and pray a minute before we kind of barrel into a fun topic. Lord, we just thank you for those that are here tonight. And we just trust that everyone is receptive, that Lord, we'd all be teachable, we'd all be able to learn and to grow and to... And sometimes, Father, people will struggle just to even see the obvious. And so, Lord, we invite the Spirit of truth to come tonight and to speak with us and visit with us and open our hearts and open our minds. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so tonight we are in part 1, Darwinian evolution, fact or fiction. Most of you probably already figured out what side of that we're coming out on. If you read the promos, you've obviously we believe Darwinian evolution is a fiction. So it's going to be 6 parts. The first 5 parts will be sequential nights. So just let me give you, there's a number of guests here tonight, so let me give you a little bit of background on who I am. I'm Glenn Holland. I actually have a degree in geology. I'm the only pastor I know that has a degree in geology. I don't know why that is. It just seems that everybody that gets that degree seems to be particularly pagan. Although in college I went to school with at least 4 or 5 guys that I'm still close friends with that are all creationists. They all have rejected evolution. They all graduate degrees in geology. Isn't that interesting? So I go through this whole process of indoctrination for 4.5 years, learning the best arguments from the secularists on evolution. And I came into kind of college with a more theistic evolution viewpoint. I was a Christian, but I was mixed. There was a lot of things I didn't understand, and part of my struggle was if science was overwhelmingly case closed, conveying this idea of Darwinism and 4.5 billion years in it, who was I to challenge it? Who was I to think differently? And so for me, I didn't want to commit intellectual suicide, but I also wanted to keep the Bible. I also wanted to keep my faith. And so in the whole process of that, and this is what a lot of people do. They're trying to kind of figure it out. They don't want to commit intellectual suicide, so they start thinking through the process. And they go, well, maybe I can mix the two together. And so by the time I got out, after 4 years of failed indoctrination, I came out on the other side of creationist. So how did that happen? And I had a lot of conversations with some of my PhD professors, and good times. And even so, my Christian friends that also went through the same program all came out creationists on the end also. Really interesting. A lot of them are friends of mine on Facebook to this day. So I have a Bachelor of Science in Geology. I went to SFA, if you know the acronym, Stephen F. Austin State University in Nacogdoches, Texas. We used to call it Nasty Roaches. I had 50 hours of geology courses. I had a minor emphasis in soils and cartography, which was kind of a civil engineering emphasis. And so 70 hours total kind of within the specialty area. So the way we're going to do this is by the time we get to the end, it'll either be part 5 or part 6. Somewhere in there, we'll open it all up for Q&A. And because along the way, what'll happen is people want to ask questions about stuff that we haven't gotten to yet. And so as you go through the whole process, next week we're going to really jump into geology a lot. It's really a fun area. That's my area. But we're also hit biology and physics and a lot of other topics. And when you come out the other end of this, you're going to be more confident about what you believe, and you'll be more confident about the scriptures as well. So, but if you want to dialogue with me afterward, like I know Val just mentioned that we're going to go to Coffee Waves and have a kind of a mixer hangout after this is over. And so I'll be there, and so if some of y'all want to kind of bend my ear or chat with me or whatever, we have kind of a private party there tonight. So we appreciate them working with us on that. So if you want to have some more conversations, we can do that. I'm not necessarily wanting you to have to wait, 6 weeks to be able to ask questions. That's not my intent. But I have so much material to cover that I don't want to get too derailed along the way, because it's really easy to get in a lot of bunny trails with this. So stick with me. So this series will demonstrate the scientific implausibility of Darwinian evolution. That is my bold proclamation today. And that is, Darwinian evolution is referring to the theory of universal common descent. You follow? So real quick, we're going to do a discussion, and Val is going to, she's got her tennis shoes on tonight. So we're going to just run a mic around. We haven't had a young adult meeting in here in a long time. We've been cramming everybody in the living room format. And so this is how we used to do it often in young adults, and we'd run a mic around. And so the discussion question is this: throughout your life, through what sources of media, programs, or educational sources have you learned about evolution? What are your sources? Oh, had one right there. Y'all going to ping pong her over here and over there?
The Land Before Time.
Was that Disney? But it's animated, right? That makes it more true.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
Ah, yeah.
The public education system.
Okay.
PBS and National Geographic.
Okay.
Jurassic Park.
That's where I learned everything. Jurassic Park. Anybody else? All right, so that's fine. Y'all did really great. How about, well, somebody said Jurassic Park. How about movies? How about various news outlets, museums? I mean, don't you go to the science museums? And they lay it on really thick. Have you ever noticed that? It's really, in National Geographic, you're right. Well, in Discovery Channel, they're one of the biggest proponents of Darwinism. Bill Nye, for sure. High school and college education, for sure. But basically, we're inundated our entire life. And I've had many people that will want to meet with me or talk with me. I remember a young lady that was getting her degree in anthropology or something, and she was actually working on her PhD, and she was about to move, and she wanted to spend an hour with me because she was struggling with this whole thing. And so in an hour, I was able to show her that, and so I had 1 hour, hour and a half to unravel her entire life full of indoctrination. And that's all it took. In a lot of these cases, because people have only heard one side their entire life, if they can hear the other side, most people don't want to just be duped. Most people don't want to just be crammed with one side, right? I mean, isn't there something inside us that says, I don't want to be fooled? And so that's the power of it. And I've had other occasions like that where I get a short opportunity, a short window to be able to really speak into somebody. In a way, I mean, if you come to all 6 parts, it's a short window here too, compared to your entire life and all these sources of constant indoctrination. So we're going to examine the evidence through 3 branches of science, mainly physics, biology, and including genetics, geology, and the fossil record. Current trends, this is interesting. There's not a lot of recent stats. The most recent is a Gallup poll that I could find, 2019. Americans believe, 22% believe that humans evolved, but God had no part in it. So in other words, essentially people who have an atheistic view of evolution. Doesn't mean that 22% are atheists, but it means their belief of their perspective of the science of it is that they are atheistic. 33% believe that humans evolved with God guiding it along. That's real common. Y'all know what that's called? Theistic evolution. I heard somebody saying it. 40% believe that humans were created in their present form. That is really a fascinating number, and it's much to the distress of the elites in academia that there are still 40% of ignorant people out there that are holding on to this Bible. How in the world are they doing that? They believe that mankind was created in his present form. And it's been very steady for 30 years. It's been 40 to 46% fluctuating back and forth. And there's a stubborn, large percentage of the American population that's not buying it, the whole narrative. Interesting, another little stat from the same year, 34% of conservative Republicans accepted evolution compared to 83% of liberal Democrats. Isn't that interesting? So why do you suppose that is? Why do you suppose that the Democrats would be so much more pro-evolution and pro-Darwinist? And I'll just suggest to you that they also don't believe in church. They don't go to church. They don't have the foundation of faith, and they don't believe or embrace the Bible. But Republicans tend to embrace the Bible, and they tend to attend church. And so that begins to be the demarcation between both sides. And it also delineates the conflict in worldviews that we have today in our country. So Americans, just fundamentally, do you believe in God? And so this is really you'll see, it's a very interesting perspective because it says, first of all, 33% of scientists, only 33% of scientists believe in God. You can go bump it up to 51% if you include a higher power, generic higher power. If you go to college professors, and this is 2011, I'm sure it's worse now. 51% of college professors believe in God. That means, but if you include higher power, it's up to 71%. That's pretty weak, you know. But look at this. 76% of doctors and physicians believe in God. That is really high. 76%. And I spent a lot of my career as an orthopedics rep working with doctors and working with surgeons, and almost all of them were theists. And many of them professed, biblical views. And it really is amazing. You can speculate, why is it that physicians and doctors would be almost twice as many of them would believe in God as over scientists? And they are more or less like scientists, MDs and DOs and so forth. So 87% of the general public of Americans believe in God. So we, the general public, believe in God far more than every other category of the kind of egghead elites, except for doctors. We're not too far apart from the people that we see, or if we have a medical condition or a medical problem, we go see an MD and we want them to help diagnose the problem. But I just wonder if they have a greater sense of empathy, a greater sense of connection with reality. Instead of kind of being stuck in a classroom and in the theoretical, they're more in the hands-on practical. So Genesis 1:1, this is our starting point. Genesis 1:1, very simple. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So I have a notable thought, and for you all that are visiting today, it's just something I do. It's kind of a funny thing I do. It's a way for me to quote myself, but it's actually a way for me to write something out that's very precise. Undermine this single verse, and we undermine the credibility of the entire Bible. How we see Genesis 1:1 has an enormous impact on how we understand the questions of where did we come from, who are we, and where are we going. It affects how we view ethics, civil and moral law, and even the founding principles of the United States and really the whole of Western civilization. So all these things are affected by how we see Genesis 1:1. And so really, Genesis 1:1 is what is under systematic attack. It's that question, that whole idea, did God actually create, or did it all come about by time and chance? So we're looking at the other side, knowing that most of us have only really heard mostly one side. Romans 1:20 through 25 says this, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened." Romans 1 is a very powerful chapter, but one of the bottom line statements here is this idea that we see his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. In other words, when we view the created world, when we look at how it's created and how it's designed and how it's made, it is screaming at us. It's not saying it's dubious, it's hard to see. If you study really hard, you can tell. No, what he's saying is that it is clearly seen. It is obvious. It's like anybody can tell. And so this is the perspective of the Bible, that the evidence is there screaming at us all the time, and it's the created world itself. And this is without the Bible. We don't even need the book of Genesis to be able to establish this fact, and that is that the earth itself, the world itself, proclaims the greatness of God. So let's look at, we need to do a few definitions as we barrel in, but the definition of science means systemized knowledge derived from observation, study, and experimentation carried on in order to determine the nature or principles of what is being studied. I love science. I've always loved science. Probably love it more now than I did when I went to college. But when we look at science, we need to understand that underneath it is a philosophical and modern, the way that it's treated in modern settings in academia and so forth. There's a big assumption that's made regarding science. And it's a consensus. It is an underlying philosophy, and it is very powerful. And it's one of the reasons we kind of butt our heads against the wall here. But it's this. It's a philosophy of naturalism, the philosophy of materialism. And that is a belief that matter is the only true reality in the world, and that everything in the world can be explained only in terms of this matter. It is an understanding that the natural world contains everything that is real and of value. So what does that mean? I know it maybe just sounds like a lot of words, but it says, therefore, if the scientific evidence for design or for a creator, you actually think there could actually be scientific evidence pointing toward a creator or a designer, a master planner. And that's what Romans 1 just said. It said it all is pointing toward a master plan and a creator behind it all. There is a designer. But if the scientific evidence for design points toward an intelligent creator, we're not allowed to go there because of this big assumption. And the big assumption would say, but that's not science, that's religion. And so we are therefore nullified in our arguments the minute we bring them. If we begin to get creation, if you will, or at least in some form, into the public schools, it's going to be in the form of intelligent design, or what's referred to as ID. That's how to get in, because the arguments for intelligent design are so compelling. And I was just watching a program put on by one of the secular groups, British produced, and they were talking about the threat of creationist ideas and how they are propagating and influencing students and keeping them from completely going all in evolution. And they included intelligent design as a threatening concept to their stronghold of belief system. It's a really interesting show. Can't believe I watched the whole thing. So this dichotomy, this idea that we have religion over here, we have concepts of the Bible over here, and then we have science, real science over here, completely separate, in a separate sphere altogether, and neither can they meet. They must remain completely separate because naturalism requires it. So anytime science begins to cross that barrier between faith And religion and science, we say, no, forbidden. You cannot go there because that is no longer science. And that's what happens over and over again. And so, but what we have to understand historically in the founding of modern science, it was never that way. These founders of modern science, it's just a few of them. I have charts where I can give you like 100 of them, 150 of them, where they all have faith. They're all theists. 90% of them are unabashed Christians. These are the founders of modern science. And so here's a few. You see their pictures here. Newton, Pascal, Boyle, Pasteur, Kelvin, Da Vinci, Mendel, Faraday, Kepler, Bacon, Joule, Steno. You probably heard a lot of those names. You may have, if you're taking science classes, you've certainly heard some of these. Like Louis Pasteur, for instance, considered one of the great scientists. If you were to ask your professor, and do it just for fun, if you're in a science class, you ask your PhD professor, and just say, listen, I just would like to know your opinion. Who do you believe is the greatest scientist to ever have lived? Have you ever asked that question? I mean, you may not even thought about it, but if you were to ask your professor that question, they will all answer the same person. I would be shocked if they don't. And that is Sir Isaac Newton. And Sir Isaac Newton, I remember listening to some real famous public NPR speaker or something, and he was going on and on about how unfortunate it was that Sir Isaac Newton wrote so much about theology in the Bible. And to think that how he could have been so much more productive if he had dedicated everything to science, if he had dedicated everything toward his research. And so, but what they don't understand by that very statement that's what made Sir Isaac Newton a great scientist. Was he believed that there was a designer and that it was intentionality in the universe, and that therefore there were reproducible laws and so forth. And it was that desire of knowing and loving God that catapulted him into his research, scientific research. So there are gradations of belief, and you can kind of look at this real quick. Atheistic, secular, Darwinian evolution is what's kind of pushed at us all the time. Theistic Darwinian evolution, that would be forbidden as well, because we can't mix faith with projecting science here. Progressive creation, these are old earth creationists. They would hold the idea of deep time. We're talking, they would be fine with the 4.5 billion years for the age of the earth and this kind of thing. And then you have the scientific creationists. These would be the young earth creationists, and there's variations within them as well. And I have my own variation, my own reasons, but a lot of seminaries today are corrupted. They are already buying into, and many of them have bought into the evolutionary dogma, especially the mainstream denominations. They've nearly all embraced the evolutionary dogma, including the Catholic Church. So we often talk about the secular institutions as being a problem, but it's not just the secular institutions. It's also many of the religious institutions. I want to note here the creation science movement, what I'm a part of and what many amazing scientists are a part of. For the last 50 to 60 years, it was inspired and led by scientists. Not by churches and not by pastors. I mean, that might be a little surprising, but you would think, how could such a powerful idea, such a powerful movement, if it wasn't for the work of the creation scientists over the last 50 to 60 years, that 40% holding the line in the United States would probably be more like 20 or 15%, like it is in some countries. But there are some bold scientists. We're talking in every field and every persuasion, really brilliant, accomplished scientists, most of which were Darwinists to begin with and then converted to a creationist viewpoint. So this is important that we also do a couple other definitions, because when we talk about evolution, there is an evolution that creationists believe in. In fact, every creationist I've ever met, any of them I've ever listened to, they all would believe in this type of evolution. That's why that's why I even qualified the title of this series, Darwinian evolution. right? Because I want to be specific, not just evolution, because there's a kind of evolution I do believe in, and every creationist I know believes in. So when I went to college, that first year in college, I was taking my first geology courses, and it's kind of exciting. It's this whole new, I'm headed down this whole new path. Next 4 years, I'm going to be studying geology. And my professor came in to the geology class, and I know he did this to provoke people. I know he did it to kind of get a sparring going. I don't think this doctor, I was going to say his name, but it probably wouldn't matter. He's probably deceased. But this particular doctor, PhD, I don't believe, he was not an atheist. He was probably more of an agnostic, and he actually had kind of a God-fearing side to him, and I know that because years into the geology program, I found that out. But on the first day as a freshman, walking into a lecture hall with 100 plus people and students, freshmen in there, wondering, am I in the right place? He walks in, and it's the first geology class is called physical geology. It's a 4-hour class. The second one is called historical geology. And so to get that degree, you've got to really put up with a lot of junk, guys. So he walks in the historical geology class, and he goes, evolution is a fact. And then just kind of let it sit. Like, let's stop arguing about it. Let's start discussing it. Let's not debate about it. Evolution is a proven fact. There's no more discussion. It's the way it is. And I'm like, what? What is he talking about? Everybody knows it's not a proven fact. But the aspect of evolution he is actually referring to actually is observable and is a fact. And this is why it's tricky. The language is tricky because he's using a language in a generic sense to think that he's talking Darwinism, and in fact, he's not talking about Darwinism per se as a proven fact. He's talking about something else. But he doesn't distinguish that on purpose because he's trying to be inflammatory with these poor freshman students. I figured this out later. So there's two types of evolution, if we can do this. Macroevolution, or this theory of universal common descent, that is what we're calling Darwinian evolution. Here's the definition. A basic theory in modern biology which states that different species of living organisms can ultimately be traced to a single common ancestor. Ultimately, it leads to the conclusion that all forms of life, bacteria, fungi, plants, animals, can be traced back to a single universal common ancestor. You all came from a bacteria. Over hundreds of millions of years, life branches from a single species into multiple ones through natural selection. That is macroevolution. And that is not a fact and is hardly proven, not even far from it. But this is the one I believe he was referring to, and this is why when you're talking to people about this topic, define terms. What do you mean when you say evolution? Microevolution, and that is certain observable variations, very limited in extent, that occur over a period of time as a species adapts to its surroundings. So we all believe in that. We all see it. We observe it. I'm going to give you examples, but you could probably give me examples. But here's what I want you to kind of get. This diagram will kind of help separate this out. The Darwinist view of common descent from one single starting point on the left is the classic tree that we've all seen many times. But consider for a moment that perhaps when we're embracing microevolution, that what we're really looking at is more of an orchard. Okay, so in the orchard sense, you have an original bird, for instance, and then that bird branches and branches and branches with various variations. You've heard of Darwin's finches and all the variation of beaks and this kind of thing. I'll talk about that more when we talk about natural selection, but the idea is that is that just think of dogs and how dogs can be bred, artificially breeding them. We're kind of creating microevolution essentially with dogs. And then you look at, but in most cases, we're talking about this progression of, say, for instance, dogs, there is a loss of information. In many cases, when you hear them referring to an example of evolution, in many of these cases, it's actually the loss of information, not the increase of information. So anyway, we'll get to examples, but I want you to get this picture because I'll bring it back later because it really helps to explain the different concepts of microevolution and macroevolution. Here's a quote from a U.S. News article, and I believe the evolutionists, the Darwinists, intentionally mix these two up because in their mind, they are one and the same thing. In their mind, microevolution leads to macroevolution, and so therefore they're part of the same continuation. You follow? So that's why their language is like this, because that's how they see it. Here's a quote in an old article, U.S. News article, but it demonstrates what I'm talking about. Saying that all of the above is fact. Okay, quote is, by now, scientists say, meaning there's nobody that doesn't, right? All the scientists. Evolution is no longer just a theory, in quotes. It's an everyday phenomenon, a fundamental fact of biology, as real as hunger and as unavoidable as death. Another phrase from that article, scientists have confirmed virtually all of Darwin's postulates. So that's where they make the jump. The first statement, you could say, well, he's just talking about microevolution. But the second statement is macroevolution. That is Darwinian evolution. So they're putting the two together and they're saying essentially that it's all proven. It's above dispute. You can't challenge this anymore. And I'm telling you, there's some real serious problems with their entire construct of evolution. We have a lot of packaging taking place. And the way it's presented, National Geographic is really good at it. And the drawings and I did a speech on this topic to a group of private school, Christian school kids in Kerrville a couple of weeks ago. I actually had to do 3 presentations. And in the presentation, they have these dino cartoons that they like. And so I had pictures of them on the screen. And how many of y'all watch Dino Dan? I watch Dino Dan. And so in these cartoons, they portray, and I would see my grandkids watching these shows, and they portray the theropod dinosaurs. The theropod, it means three-toed dinosaurs. It portrays them with feathers or partial feathers, like velociraptor-type animals with feathers. There is no evidence. It's all conjecture. It's a story they made up and that they're telling. So here, they really got in trouble over this because National Geographic, there was some fossils found in China, and they went crazy. We finally have it. This is evidence of the missing link. They need it so bad because they don't have it. So we found a dinosaur bird-like creature. And so here it is, the feathered dinosaurs. In this book, beautifully done. It's got lots of pictures and graphs and charts and fossils and all kinds of stuff. Well, National Geographic pulled this off the market. You know why? Oh, and then they had one of their normal monthly issues on the same topic. There you have it. There's a picture proof of the feathered dinosaur. Well, they had to recant on all of it because it turns out the fossils they were looking at from China, somebody had, I don't know who did it, I don't know how they did it, but they took a couple of different creatures and mixed them together and created a new creature from different fossils. And they figured out that there had been a fabrication. So that is the marketing that's done, the story that's told, and it's very effective. It's very persuasive because if you see it, you can believe it, right? So I'm going to spend a few minutes. Does it feel warm in here to y'all? No? Well, it feels warm to me, but it says it's 70. I guess I'm just not used to the colder weather outside. All right, so I have to back up a little bit because I realize that in a meeting like this that people come from a lot of different backgrounds. Some have a lot of science, some have very little. And so don't, if you have a lot of science background, I'm not trying to patronize you in any way, but I need to kind of bring people up to speed. So I have to kind of give you a little bit of the doctrine of evolution that maybe you've all heard it or learned it, but I want to explain to you how in their model of thinking, how evolution actually works. These are the 5 things that anytime they present evidence for Darwinism or evolution, they will always cite one of these 5 things every single time. I don't know anything else they can cite, but this is where all of their evidence is compiled within these 5 things. And so through this series, what I'm going to do slowly is I'm going to kind of disprove each one of them one at a time. But first, I want to explain to you kind of how it works. So their first proof, and I kind of already laid this out, is the existence of microevolution. So because they see it as a continuum, therefore, if I can show you microevolution, do I need to give you an example of microevolution? Do you kind of picture adaptations? If, for instance, I've referenced Darwin's finches, for instance, where certain beaks that they had by natural selection were more effective at gathering food or seed or whatever than other beaks, and so they tended to survive the season more so. And so natural selection selected some of the finches, and all of it unraveled eventually anyway because the weather changed. But that's the idea of natural selection. And so the first thing, that would be an example of microevolution, if you will, and that's just the animals are adapting. If rabbits are in the snow, the white ones survive. The brown ones don't do well. And so the next year you have a lot of white rabbits until the snow melts. And then the brown ones do better. Okay, so the existence of microevolution, that's just to give you an idea of it. Okay, so the second thing that is cited often is the progressive nature of the fossil record. And so that is the idea that when you go in the really deep rocks, the lower, older rocks, those tend to have more simple types of fossils and animals represented. And then as you go higher and higher in the fossil record, you see more what we would call advanced creatures and animals represented, and then with us at the apex. So that idea of the progressive nature of the fossil record is a big part of it. But it has a couple of really big Achilles heel. I'm going to go over 4 things that are just disastrous from the fossil record standpoint. Comparative anatomy is a really big deal. So if you go in any of the museums, you go in the Houston Natural Science Museum, any of them, they will put the hands and feet of various fossils or dinosaurs and next to human, or maybe a whale that has 5 fingers that are fused together within its fin. Okay, so they'll say, well, see there? That means that a whale was derived the same way we were with 5 digits. But it really just has a flipper. Right? But within the structure of the flipper, it has the support structure of the skeleton. But the idea is that we compare the anatomy and go, aha, well, see, all these creatures have five digits, and dinosaurs just have 3 digits, right? So, and they may be more like birds. So anyway, this is the idea of comparing anatomy. This is where they go with it all the time. So, comparative genomes. So you've probably heard it. Well, the chimpanzee has a genome that's almost identical to ours, so therefore we're cousins. This kind of thing. Number 5 would be dating methods indicating ancient ages. And so to be able to show 100 million years, 500 million years, a billion years in the rock record is essential for the model of evolution. If you can undermine that in a significant way, then the whole house of cards falls apart. And that's why we will spend some time looking at methods of dating rocks and time and so forth as we go into this. But these are where they go. All 5 of these are their go-to arguments. The theory works through natural selection and mutations in combination. So mutations are, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but essentially I want you to understand the God of evolution is a mutation and natural selection in combination. And that these two things are the winning the lottery. Because if an animal gets a mutation that's favorable, that it has a better chance of surviving, and so natural selection will favor that particular animal, and that's how evolution progresses. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. That's the essence of it. And the other thing it's very important to understand is that evolution, as it's taught, as it's presented, in every academic setting I can think of, any time I've ever heard it, whether it's PBS or National Geographic or any of the documentaries, they always, without exception, present it as atheistic. In other words, it's purely naturalistic and mechanistic, meaning that it can bring about this result from A to B as a result of natural processes. And it all happens through a lot of time, a lot of chance, a lot of randomness, a lot of mutations, a lot of natural selection over hundreds of millions of years, and that voila, on the other end we get this. We get us. Okay. So, but this is, the theory itself is implicitly atheistic. Even though most people that are Darwinists are not atheists. That's just one of those conundrums. It's hard to give up God. I mean, it really is, even though they have a theory and a belief system. And I remember the same doctor I was talking to earlier, he was teaching us about photosynthesis, and he got to a point, I'm going to talk about photosynthesis eventually, but I'll get to that later. So the implications of evolution, Darwinist evolution, when applied to philosophy is disastrous. So evolution is the logical foundation, and this is where it gets a little controversial, but I can back it up. It is the logical foundation or the rationale of naturalism, atheism, agnosticism, humanism, fascism, Nazism, and communism. I mean, once you connect the dots on this, it kind of makes you ashamed to say, well, I believe in Darwinian evolution, because it is the rationale, you understand? It is the logic behind, it's what's used to justify. And so I have a clip that kind of links this to Nazism, Darwin and eugenics, in some of this area of, this is from the movie Expelled. We'll watch that.
Further. So I met with the author of From Darwin to Hitler, Dr. Richard Weikart.
Hitler and many of the physicians that carried out this program were very fanatical Darwinists, and particularly they wanted to apply Darwinism to society.
Was wir uns unter der deutschen Jugend der Zukunft wünschen, ist etwas anderes, als was die Vergangenheit sich gewünscht hat. Wir müssen einen neuen Menschen, auf das unser Volk nicht an den typischen Degenerationserscheinungen dieser neuen Zeit runde geht.
Many of these people in the 19-teens, 1920s, who were putting forward some of these ideas about racism were considered the leading scientists. These were Darwinists who were taken seriously by fellow academics. It's not to say that all academics believed it.
These leading academics, were there any of them who were Americans?
There were plenty of Americans who were saying similar kinds of things.
Not only were Americans saying such things, they were pioneers in this fledgling science known as eugenics. They thought they could help evolution along by sterilizing the so-called feeble-minded and prohibiting them from getting married.
We'll have a few more that we take from that, but Darwin, the connection of eugenics and Darwin. So, if you take these ideas to their logical conclusion, you come up with dumb things like this. Here is a crowds go ape over humans zoo exhibit. So, in other words, if they keep telling us over and over and over that you're just nothing but an animal, why would it surprise us if we start acting like animals? Because what's the basis of morality? If we're just a higher being of evolution, And so what they did is they took this to its logical conclusion. And some of the statements from the article, it's the actual Associated Press article, by the way. It says, warning, humans in their natural environment. Read the sign at the entrance to the exhibit. Visitors stop to point and laugh. And several children could be heard asking, why are there people in there? Kind of like reminds me of the little kid that says the emperor has no clothes. Why are there people in the zoo? Seeing, and this is quoting from an artist, seeing people in a different environment among other animals teaches members of the public that the human is just another primate. A lot of people think humans are above other animals, he told the Associated Press. When they see humans are animals here, it kind of reminds us that we're not that special. Okay, wait a minute. We're not that special. What does the Bible say? Are you special? Genesis chapter 1 says this, then God said, so everything goes back to Genesis 1, okay. Then God said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness. Let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the livestock, over all the earth and over all the creatures that move along the ground. We're made in the image of God. We're the apex of His creation. And so this is the opposite. It's a contradiction, and that's why we have to hold the line on all this. So, why do your origins matter? Have you ever wondered why you're here on this planet? Do you sense that you have a calling? Don't you have a sense within that you're here for a purpose? That longing that somehow your life should count for something? Don't you have that in you as a human being? Or are you just a product of impersonal forces that time and chance has produced? And so Proverbs 23:7 says, for as he thinks in his heart, so is he. So we have a whole generation being indoctrinated with these lies. So we're going to change gears a little bit, and I want to cover intelligent design a bit here, or it's called, often referred to as ID. It's not a new idea. It's really very intuitive. It's very logical. I remember being in Colorado with my kids when they were a lot smaller, and there was a place in the river where there were 4 big boulders, or was it 3 big boulders? But these boulders were all lined up across the river, and the path led up to the boulders, and then you walk over the boulders to get to the path on the other side of the boulders. And I'd ask the kids, I said, so do you think that these boulders, these 4 boulders in a row, got here accidentally, like randomly, or do you think that somebody put them here? And they all unanimously, in other words, even kids are smart. Well, Dad, of course somebody put them there. I said, I agree with you. I think somebody put them there. But that is looking at order. It's looking at a natural reflection of man putting order on the created world. It's like if you look at a chair, you know intuitively that there's a chair maker behind the chair. And as much as I look at something as simple as 3 or 4 boulders in a row, and people step back and go, well, of course that was put there in order. But yet we can look at the order in the created world, which is astronomically beyond 4 boulders in a row. And yet we go, oh, well, I don't know if God did that. It might have, it had to be mutations, natural selection, and all this other stuff that happened over given enough time, anything can happen. So intelligent design. So I have another clip for you that kind of demonstrates this point.
27 the second we're there, and leave the yellow frequency where it is. Stay on it, fish, don't let it get away. If you lose it, just scan the bin. Run every frequency you can think of. How you doing? Talk to me, guys.
Partially polarized set of moving pulses, amplitude modulated.
We're locked. Systems check out, signal across the board. What's the frequency?
4.4623 gigahertz. Hydrogen times pi. Told you.
Strong sucker, too.
I got it. I'm patched in.
All right, let me hear it. Listen to that. Make me a liar, fish.
Could be AWACS out of Kirtland jamming us, but I'm doubting it.
All right, let's see if Fudd's reading it too. Willie, patch it back and give me the off axis. Are we recording?
Never stopped.
Thank you, Elmer.
AWACS status is negative.
Now, what about White Sands?
On this frequency, no.
I'm gonna punch up the darks. How's the spine tonight, guys? Come on. All right.
NORAD's not tracking any snoops in this vector. Shuttle Endeavor's in sleep mode.
Okay, point source confirmed. Whatever it is, it ain't local.
Position?
I checked it.
So you get the idea? So they're getting this signal from outer space, and it's just this rhythm, boom, 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 boom. And that's all it took for them to get excited and to realize that somehow that simple pattern represents intelligence. And all the audiences that watch this movie, they're probably going, yeah, it has to represent intelligence. If it's coming from outer space and it's like, boom, 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 it's clear it must be intelligence. But yet, as simple as that is, that's no more complicated than the 3 or 4 boulders in the river, right? So when we look at intelligent design, there's 3 things I want us to catch. We're going to look at irreducible complexity, design in nature, and genetic complexity. Irreducible complexity. If you can just think of this as all or nothing, this is an Achilles heel in the entire evolutionary model. The idea is that there are certain things in the created world that are functional in their construct as they are. And if you remove any component from that construct, it's irreducibly complex, meaning that it has these components, but if you remove one component, it no longer has a purpose. It just has disorder. It's just mass without any purpose. So a good example would be the mousetrap. So if you think of a mousetrap, that's a simple device, but there are devices in nature that are created that are about something, I don't know, they're more complicated than this, but they are irreducibly complex. This is irreducibly complex, meaning that if I take any component from it, you have the spring, then you have the big lever, then you have the arm that holds it in place, and you have the little trigger point, right? And then you have the wooden platform. So what, 5 pieces? 1, 2, 3, 4, I guess 5 pieces. Oh, and then there's a little thing there that anchors it. 6 pieces, right? So if you remove any component of this mousetrap, it is useless. It will never catch. It's not really, it's actually a rat trap. It's a little bigger, see? So, but if you remove any component from that trap, it cannot function. It has no purpose. It's just a piece of wood with wire, right? So that's the idea that you can't take anything, you can't reduce it in simplicity anymore. Many years ago in high school, I had a Triumph Spitfire, and we had to take it apart and get the engine swapped out, and we ended up with extra parts. And I'm kind of like, where do they go? And it seemed to run just fine. We didn't know where to put them. We put it all back together, and there were the extra parts. Apparently, it was not irreducibly complex, meaning that it could still function and carry on its purpose without all of these parts. And we're kind of that way too. You know, you can give up an appendix and you're still functioning, right? So that's an example of something that is not irreducibly complex. So when we look at the human body, you have these components, and in nature itself, nanomachines all over human nature. There's 100 trillion cells in your human body, and in each cell, there are thousands of nanomachines. Every cell has thousands of these little devices that operate. And that on the left is an example of a bacterial or viral flagellum. A similar thing with the sperms on the right. These are all forms of nanomachines, and they are very complicated. They have parts. And so, for instance, the flagellum, which is in many microorganisms, it has these features, real quick. Self-assembly and repair, water-cooled rotary engine, proton motive force drive system, forward and reverse gears, operating of speeds up to 100,000 RPM, Direction reversing capability within 1/4 of a turn is hardwired signal transduction system with short-term memory. All that in the flagellum. But when you look at the components, the various pieces that make up the rotary engine and all that, you can't remove anything from it or it's just useless material. It has no purpose. It's irreducibly complex. What does that mean? What that means is that there is no transitional predecessor possible, since anything less complex is disorganized and useless. So many structures like this, some would say the eye is like that. If you remove one component from the eye, it has no purpose, it has no function. So I guess you could use that mousetrap as a paperweight. So I want to make sure you understand this concept is very important. There is no transitional predecessor possible, since anything less complex is disorganized and useless. So in Darwinism, you have to have a less sophisticated predecessor, something coming up behind it that is the kind of precursor of what's coming next. And in the case of these devices, there is no precursor. So here's a great quote from Michael Behe, is a professor of biochemistry, talking about irreducible complexity and the flagellum. He says, an irreducibly complex system cannot be produced directly by numerous successive slight modifications of a precursor system, because any precursor to an irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. Since natural selection can only choose systems that are already working, then if a biological system cannot be produced gradually, it would have to arise as an integrated unit in one fell swoop for natural selection to have anything to act on. Does that make sense? So it has to evolve in one fell swoop, all assembled. So hopefully you all understand that concept. It's very important. Second thing, I will look at design and nature. There's so many things in nature. I mean, if you just look at the human eye, I mean, it's like, you know, so, okay, the human eye, even if you could fathom that it evolved once, how does it evolve twice? I mean, really, just a rational person, you have to think about this. We all have, even animals get two eyes. We have two of them, identical. And they give us 3 dimensions. They have a purpose. How do you evolve 2 of these things simultaneously, and they're irreducibly complex? So you see design in nature. I'm going to kind of move this. Go to the ear, same thing. Go to the knee. You can go to the navigation capabilities of bees and birds and the archer fish. And there's all kinds of really cool stuff in nature. But photosynthesis is particularly cool. So here's the formula of photosynthesis. It's really amazing. It's what plants produce. So 6 parts of, what's the first item? Carbon dioxide. Second item, 6 parts of water plus light. And what do we produce? I mean, how do you do this? So we're going to take a little carbon dioxide. There, you get some. And then we're going to get a little bit of oxygen. I mean, a little bit of water. Oh, here's a little water, carbon dioxide. Okay. Oh, and then some sunlight. And then we produce that on the right-hand side. What is that? Carbohydrates. Okay, so plants produce food. Okay, so how does that happen? So real quick, chloroplasts. These organelles are usually disc-shaped and can reorient themselves in the cell to vary their exposure to sunlight, about 100 of them per plant cell. Chloroplasts, sunlight energy is trapped by chlorophyll and converted first into electrical, then into chemical energy, which is temporarily stored. These compounds are later used as fuel to power the light-independent fixation of CO2 into sugars. Everybody got it? Okay, so this is nature. I mean, this is like already in everything. So this is the one, that formula I showed you a moment ago when my agnostic geology professor got to photosynthesis. He stopped. there was kind of a hushed feeling in the room. And he said, as much as I believe in evolution, and I can kind of explain a lot of it, he says, but when we get to this formula right here, he says, I'm stumped. I cannot see how evolution exerted on a real world can produce that. He said, it is out of this world amazing. And I thought, wow, I think he believes in God. See, I learned a lot about him in the future. So, number 3, genetic complexity. Complexity of the cell. I call this the elephant in the living room. This is actually written by a man named, anonymously known as the biologist. It's a discussion as to the complexity of the genetic code. He is anonymous because he doesn't want to lose his, you'll see as I read it. So the microbiologist says, I'm a bit like an editor trying to find a spelling mistake inside a document larger than 4 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. The interviewer says, do you believe that the information evolved? George, nobody I know in my profession believes it evolved. It was engineered by genius beyond genius. And such information could not have been written any other way. The paper and ink did not write the book. Knowing what we know, it is ridiculous to think otherwise. Interviewer, have you ever stated that in a public lecture or in any public writings? Microbiologist, no, I just say it evolved. To be a molecular biologist requires one to hold onto 2 insanities at all times. 1, it would be insane to believe in evolution when you can see the truth for yourself. 2, it would be insane to say you don't believe in evolution. All government work, research grants, papers, big college lectures, everything would stop. I'd be out of a job or relegated to the outer fringes where I couldn't earn a decent living. Interviewer, I hate to say it, but that sounds intellectually dishonest. And he says, the work I do in genetic research is honorable. We will find the cures to many of mankind's worst diseases, but in the meantime, we have to live with the elephant in the living room. What elephant? Creation design. It's like an elephant in the living room. It moves around, takes up enormous amounts of space, loudly trumpets, bumps into us, knocks things over, eats tons of hay, and smells like an elephant, and yet you have to swear it isn't there. So with that, we're going to play this next clip.
Thought a cell was, say, a mud hut. What do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the 2 helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make protein. We have information in a 1-dimensional form that provides the information for a 3-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
Okay, so it brings us back to this point, and that is, if the scientific evidence of design points toward an intelligent creator, then why would we not let it lead us there? That's the insanity of the dominant flow, dominant stream of our culture, our educational systems, our institutions today. If you go to the Smithsonian Institute, which is the national, well, would be what is the national one on the mall in D.C.? The National Museum of Natural History. I mean, it's like the entire museum is nothing but a pro-Darwinist expression. Everywhere you turn, that's all it is. It's dogma and propaganda. The genome is the complete set of genetic instructions contained in the cell. Every cell in your body has the complete instructions, the genome. The genome's set of instructions is not a simple, static, linear array of letters, but is a dynamic, self-regulating, multidimensional. There is no human information system that can even begin to compare to it. The genome's highest levels of complexity and interaction are probably beyond the reach of our understanding. That is a quote from John Sanford, who is a geneticist, PhD. I'm trying to wrap up here shortly. Cell division. What does my genome look like? If all the DNA from a single human cell was stretched out end to end, it would make a 6-foot-long strand comprised of a 6 billion letter code. It's hard to imagine how that much DNA can be packed into a cell's nucleus, which is so small it can only be seen with a specialized microscope. The secret lies in the highly structured and tightly packed nature of the genome. That is actually a quote from the National Human Genome Research Institute. The human genome, MIT says, contains 100 gigabytes of storage, uncompressed, to preserve one entire human being. That is the same as tens of thousands of books, essentially. Interesting that Microsoft has begun researching the idea of using DNA to store information because its capacity is so beyond anything that we have, and that's one of the problems we have in the information revolution, is that how do we get enough storage? The information keeps exploding, we keep needing more and more hard disk space, right? So the digital DNA, the similarity of DNA code and computer programming is uncanny. The discovery that DNA codes information as a digital form, in a digital form, points decisively back to prior intelligence. I think in the previous thing I had ATCG, which would be the kind of digital construct of DNA. So Microsoft is currently buying 10 million strands of DNA from biology startup Twist Bioscience. This has actually been a few years they've been at it, to investigate the use of genetic material to store data. The data density of DNA is orders of magnitude higher than conventional storage systems, with 1 gram of DNA able to represent close to 1 billion terabytes. Just digest that for a moment. 1 gram of DNA is able to represent close to 1 billion terabytes of data. DNA is also remarkably robust. DNA fragments, thousands of years old, have been successfully sequenced. So I'm going to save this clip for next week. It's a clip interview with Dawkins with Ben Stein. It's just fabulous, but it's a little bit long, and I think we can start off with it next week. Next week, we're going to look at the fossil record, what is actually there, why the fossil record does not support evolution. What about missing links? What about human evolution? what some of the things Darwin actually said in his book, Origin of Species, might actually surprise you. It's actually very interesting. If you haven't actually read the book, I'd encourage you to read it. I'd love to chat with you about it. But with that, let's go ahead and call it a night, and then those that would like to can go to Coffee Ways with us for the late night people, the night creatures, and I know we said for young adults, but anybody that would like to join us is welcome to come. So let's pray and commit this time to the Lord. Lord, we just thank you for the amazing created world that declares your glory. Lord, thank you for all those that came tonight to learn and to grow, and to have clarity in their thinking. We commit this night to you in Jesus' name. Amen. You know, when I saw that clip the first time, quite a number of years ago, it came out, the animation of the nanomachines, it caused me to weep. I don't know if it had that effect on you if you never saw it, but it actually was so stunning to me when I first saw it. It just amazing, you know,